Sorry, choir. I miscounted. I owe you one. Saturday. Good morning. And may the 4th be with you. I heard a couple. What's the response? Nice job. George Lucas, I'm pretty sure, was not an Episcopalian, but had clearly heard about church. Our gospel reading that we heard today, this scene with Jesus and the disciples, what I like to call breakfast on the beach, is the final scene in John's gospel. But it's really a postscript, an epilogue, to what most scholars contend is already the closing of the gospel, which was Jesus' appearance to Thomas that we heard last week. Scholars' best guess is that this story was added in the editing phase of John's gospel, and there's very little consensus on the authorship. But however it was that this epilogue came to round out John's gospel, it is clear that it intends to remind us of key moments in Jesus' ministry before his death and resurrection. This miracle, this sign, as John's gospel calls it, of abundance in this story, this sign of so many fish they can barely haul it in, happens in Galilee. It is like the first sign of John's gospel at the wedding at Cana, where water turns to wine. Cana is also a town in Galilee. Our translation calls it the Sea of Tiberias, but that's simply another name for what most know as the Sea of Galilee. And as you know, it's a central location of Jesus' earthly ministry. This return home of sorts in today's reading brings us away from the image of fearful disciples huddling in a locked room in Jerusalem. And they've attempted to return to some semblance of normalcy, their earthly profession of fishing for literal fish. So if you tune your ears a little bit more to the humanness of the disciples, you'll recognize that desire to return to normalcy after the trauma of Jerusalem, the trial and crucifixion, and the mystery of the resurrection. So Peter, I imagine, like nearly any man who has grown restless and frustrated, pent up in a locked room for days or weeks, looks around the room and says to everyone, "I'm out. I'm going fishing. Who's with me?" And no surprise, a few take him up on the offer. And their fishing trip, at least initially, turns out like many fishing trips. A lot of fishing and not a lot of catching. But then they are interrupted, of course, by Jesus' presence, though they don't recognize him immediately. And this is a place where the epilogue begins to look back. The disciples' inability to recognize Jesus at first is intended to remind us of Mary Magdalene in the garden on Easter morning, where she mistakes Jesus for the gardener, or our friends on the road to Emmaus that evening, who only recognize him in the breaking of bread. This breakfast on the beach scene evokes the feeding of the 5,000. There's bread and fish that are shared. It evokes scenes of table fellowship with Jesus and his disciples that happen over and over in the gospel, and particularly the Last Supper, where Jesus serves them. And we now see that even after Jesus' resurrection, Christ continues to bless and feed the disciples and us. And of course, there's this ongoing admonishment and teaching between Jesus and Peter. No relaxing fishing trip for Peter. No peace for Peter, as we come to see. No peace for Peter, who seems to be known for jumping into the sea whenever he sees Jesus, who seems to live on a never give up, never think things through spirit. until the rubber really meets the road and he is caught denying having known Jesus at all outside the home of the high priest. But for all that this epilogue looks back to, most scholars agree that it takes a very specific turn towards the future, specifically the future of the church. Peter, who is also known as the Rock and the founder of our church, is examined and commanded to tend the flock, to feed the sheep. And it even goes so far as to remind the reader of Peter's martyrdom. And when you begin to learn about the early church, you discover how essential the role of the martyrs is to the spread of the gospel. Martyrdom is a paradox where the world attempts to stamp out the good news, but instead it spreads the seeds of the church like dandelions. And we are the inheritors of those seeds sown in that martyrdom as we sit in this room today. Though there is no mortal safety for Peter in Jesus' love, we are reminded that there is great abundance in Jesus' love. Like I told the kids earlier, when Jesus says to Peter, "Feed my sheep," he means to love and care for them. To love and care for them like the good shepherd who is willing to lay down his life for the sheep. As we consider this epilogue, this postscript, perhaps the risen Christ offers the Peter in each of us another way to recognize and encounter the divine. As Jesus tells the impetuous and active disciple 3 times to feed his sheep, it is as if our denials, our own denials of God, are somehow redeemed by our living encounters with Christ in serving one another, as we serve the hungry and the poor and the forgotten. However, there is both a beloved disciple, the other central figure in John's gospel, and an overactive Peter in each of us. And this gospel passage gives us some guidance in surviving and even overcoming circumstances that threaten to overwhelm us. Like Peter, we are not sent empty-handed. Jesus' exchange with Peter demonstrates the way in which we, Jesus' disciples, are examined and equipped in our walk with Jesus. As we take communion together, as we study and fellowship with one another, we are fed by Christ's love. The way Peter and the disciples are examined and equipped and fed to go out to share Christ's love with others. That equipping helps us to recognize and nurture the presence of the risen Christ, even in the busyness of our daily lives. Feeding God's sheep, whether it be with a Hershey's Kiss or serving one another at Grace to Go, and all of the many wonderful ministries and outreach that you all are involved in across Leesburg and Loudoun County and beyond, is a tangible way of staying in relationship with Jesus, as well as the surest way to express our love for him, not only with our lips, but in our lives. Amen.